This video will tackle the historical perspectives related to the origins of World War I, focusing on traditionalist, centrist and revisionist theories. Britain was involved in the Moroccan crisis in 1905, in which they chose to back French interests in the region over German interests as per the terms of their agreement in 1904, termed as the Entente Cordiale, which allowed French expansion in Morocco and allowed the British to pursue their interests in Egypt. The crisis began due to the Kaiser's intervention, in which he visited the area and declared support for the Sultan against French occupation. He believed Britain would sit back, but instead Britain and Italy, a German ally, supported France, fueling strong resentment of the Entente. The British were also locked in a fierce naval race with Germany, which made war ever more likely as they grew their military might. This led to the British construction of the Dreadnought in 1906, which outdid German naval ships in ability and power. This made Germany increasingly paranoid of an invasion by the Entente powers, while they were behind in military technology at the time. Moreover, the Treaty of London, signed in 1839, ensured British protection of Belgium if invaded. Of course, they were invaded by the Germans as per the Schlieffen Plan, which automatically dragged Britain into the war. The British failed to give warning to the Germans, who also exhibited their own ineptitude in this affair, that they would declare war if Belgian neutrality is breached, largely through negligence, causing some to believe the invasion, for the British, was a convenient reason to involve itself in the conflict. The French spotted the Agadir crisis by placing a substantial military force in Agadir, which harmed the Kaiser's interest in the area, leading to a German gunboat being dispatched to the port of Fez controlled by France. This crisis died down quickly, with Germany again lacking support to justify their territory claims, and led to the Treaty of Fez, entailing the establishment of Franco-Spanish rule in Morocco. The French also pushed for a strengthening of the Triple Entente and gave funding to Russia to build railroads to aid mobilization against Germany. They also had a grudge against Germany after the loss of Alsace-Lorraine during the Franco-Prussian War and centered their foreign policy aims around this. The Russians in the early 1910s mobilized their forces through French funding in their front Austrian interference in the Balkans. Their reasons date back to the Bosnian crisis in 1908, in which Austria annexed Bosnia, which hurt their links to the Slavic people of the region, and Austria, with the backing of Germany, refused to back down. Russia, in response, provided arms to Serbia to retain their independence against Austria, again harming Austrian interests in the Balkans. It must also be acknowledged Austria's declaration of war on Serbia after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914 set off the domino effect which would suck most European nations into the conflict. Remarque adapts a traditionalist perspective on the events which led to war, arguing Germany escalated the war through their ignorance by forcing British involvement in the conflict. He says in his book The Origins of World War I, 1871 to 1914, that the implications of the Entente Cordiale and the very plain provisions of the Treaty of 1839 were quite sufficient warning here. Certainly believes the Germans to be ignorant of clear warnings by the opposing alliance, and their incessant attempts to arm the Entente Cordiale ultimately increased the possibility of war. Remarque also defends the French by vindicating them of responsibility, saying the nation that all these many decades later can still be at least responsible for the outbreak of the war is France, sporting this with their restraint when approaching Germany even after losing great amounts of land to them in previous wars. Remarque argues the Germans lacked the political imagination and the diplomatic skill to keep France neutral, presenting an unacceptable ultimatum and then marching on Paris. Mombauer equally blames Germany for World War I, but for different reasons to Remarque. Mombauer argues in a book that the origins of the First World War, controversies and consensus, that Germany had stirred Britain into a position of hostility towards it by openly and deliberately challenging British supremacy at sea. This view is conclusive in its blame of Germany, suggesting them to be aggressors and agitators most of all towards the British. She also describes German actions towards the Entente Cordiale as bullying tactics, especially their actions regarding Morocco, which led to the First and Second Moroccan crises in 1905 and 1911. Williamson acknowledges blame on all sides, remaining rather centrist in his approach to the war's origins. He examines the 5-year coordinated expansion of the Central Alliance, including German efforts to expand their navy and Austrian efforts to expand their empire through the annexation of Bosnia in 1908, which contributed to a volatile climate in Eastern Europe. He also discusses stubborn German support for Austrian interests in the Balkans, most notably during the Balkans Wars in 1912, which created great tension with Russia, who was receiving inflammatory funding from the French allies at the time. Williamson, in his journal The Origins of World War I, Journal of Interdisciplinary History, describes Austria as having furnished most of the threats to its future, which holds weight when countering supposed defensive measures Austria took in the Balkans, which in fact gave the Russians more reason to disrupt Austrian interests and by proxy Russia's close allies France and Britain. However, Williamson discusses the Entente's blame in the outbreak of war as well. He points to Russian intervention in Romania and the Balkans, which harmed Austria in a variety of ways. The Russians sent a diplomat to Romania in order to disturb anti-Austrian sentiment in the country. The Russians also kept 1.2 million troops on duty to prepare for an Austrian attack on Serbia in 1914, arguably exacerbating the climate already high at the time. It's not just the Russians who are focused on by Williamson, though. He shifts blame onto the French as well, saying in his journal Origins of World War I that from 1912 to the eve of war, France and Russia worked to convert the Triple Alliance into a Triple Entente into alliance, which suggests that the French desired to divide Europe to act as a buffer to the sea threat of Germany. He briefly touches upon British blame in his journal, supporting this with the visit Great Lord of the Admiralty made to Russia in 1914, which was picked up by Germany. However, the British denied this ever happening, further fueling German paranoia. Williamson does offer an interesting view on why most nations entered the war after the assassination of Francis Ferdinand, saying in his previously mentioned journal that everywhere the doctrine of offensive warfare and short war illusion prevailed, indicating that the outbreak of war was not simply the fault of the various nations' actions, but an idea so strong in its reframing the truth that it justified going to war in 1914. Strachan doesn't push blame onto specific countries, but instead provides a defence of Germany, quite rare. He defends Weltpolitik in his book, The Oxford Illustrated History of the First World War, which he argues the policy was more centred around achieving integration within Germany to reconcile agriculture and industry and to woo social democracy. This suggests Strachan sees Weltpolitik as less about world domination and more about domestic improvement of Germany. He furthers this point, summarising the policy was more focused on short-term successes reflected in their efforts to expand their trading capabilities in North Africa in the Moroccan crisis. Strachan boldly claims it seems fairly clear that Germany did not want this war, which has strength given the Kaiser's backing down in the Agadir crisis, arguably to maintain peace. He provides balance by acknowledging German tactics regarding the Entente were aggressive, but retorts this by claiming they were defensive and reveal more about the Entente than Germany. The various historians covered all forms of perspective relating to the origins of World War I. Remarque and Montbauer differ on their reasoning on why Germany would have blamed for the war, showing the range of views displayed even in the same traditional sphere of thought. The idea and opinions put forth oppose Williamson's views on the war's origins. Remarque would disagree with Williamson that the French had blame in the affair, believing them to be vindicated from blame in all circumstances, and the least to blame of all European nations at least. Montbauer would similarly be opposed to Williamson's viewpoints on Germany. However, Williamson, unlike Remarque and Montbauer, manages to expand the argument beyond the confines of the nations, and pushes much of the quick escalation of the war in the summer of 1914 onto an idea. The idea of the short war illusion, an improvable yet interesting thesis put forth, that many countries of the time believed the war would be short, minimum 3 months, maximum 6. Britain were most responsible for this type of thought. Strachan is the closest to a revisionist from the four. He repeatedly defends Germany, a rare occasion in the discussion of the origins of the war. He provides the alternative to Remarque and Montbauer, and suggests much of the Germans' reactions were defensive, not aggressive, even their actions towards the Entente and their repeated attempts to split the alliances apart. In conclusion, the answers of who or what is responsible for the outbreak of war, whether that be an idea, aggression, defensive measures, or the three crises of the time, is still and always be a hotly debated topic in historical circles, with no clear or coherent answers truly available to conclusively claim which specific nations were responsible, without doubt, for the war. The origins are lost in the zealous debate surrounding over the past century and will continue to be.